So welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Molly Murphy. I'm an implementation scientist with the D&I Dissemination and Implementation Launchpad. And this is DRISS Presents TEACH-RS Recruitment Science, which is a monthly lunchtime seminar to learn about dissemination and implementation research and recruitment science. This is actually our last seminar of the this year. But usually they take place on the second Friday of every month at noon Central Time. And it's open to everybody and is part of the Implementation Science and Community Health Outcomes Certificate, which addresses the gap between basic research discoveries and their application in clinical and public health practice. As I mentioned, this is our last one for this year until September. So with that, we would love to hear from folks, whether you drop it in the chat or send us an email about topics or presenters or different formats that you might want to see in the coming academic year, because we start planning that pretty soon, actually, in June, for that to start up. But we would love ideas about what you want to hear about. So please share those with us as they occur to you. Part of that planning will involve the D&I Launchpad's new director, who's joining us today, Dr. Shelley Ellis. Shelley, I think this is Shelley's second week here. She comes to us from the University of Kansas Medical Center, and we're delighted to have her and to get her thoughts and enthusiasm for this seminar in planning for the next year. So please share with us your ideas. Right now, we're really excited about the group that we have presenting today. So I want to turn it over to them so that they can introduce themselves. And if you have questions throughout, please put them in the chat. And if there's time at the end, we'll get to them. But yeah, thanks for joining. And in the meantime, I'll turn it over to Kat.
Hi, everyone. Anyone who's based in Madison, kudos for choosing to be on your computer on this gorgeous Friday. Thank you for your time and attention. We hope to make it well worth your while. I'm Kat Phelps. I'm based here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I'm jointly supported by ICTR and the School of Nursing to do community-engaged research support for teams across both this university and across the country. I'm really honored to work with a group that's a national group called the Community Engagement Brokers, CE Brokers, which is folks all across the country associated with CTSAs who support community engaged research. And it was that group that believed having a conference presentation that is designed by and presented solely by community partners as opposed to being structured by and controlled by university partners was a really good idea. And we were right. This group that you're going to hear from today presented at the Translational Science 2025 conference in Washington, D.C. Last month. And they agreed to bring it to this group today. So you're seeing part 2 of that presentation. And I will confess that the person who moderated was far more dynamic and interesting than me. In Washington, D.C., Jamie Fraser from Northwestern was the moderator, and he couldn't come today. So I'm going to serve as a moderator, and all the rest of the folks who were present were willing to participate. So what we'd love to do is have each person do a brief introduction of their work and their affiliation, and then we'll jump into the panel discussion. So Kati, we'll start with you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kari Bañuelos. I am a senior research associate with Clarity Social Research Group and a CTSI CAB member at University of California, San Francisco.
Hi, everyone. My name is Christina Johnson. I'm based here in Madison. I'm the Director of Volunteer and Community Engagement at Second Harvest Food Bank. I'm also a CAB member with Trina at CARDS. And I have been working in the nonprofit sector for about 20 years.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Crystal Stevenson, and I'm the community coordinator for the Auburn Gresham Neighborhood Center that's right here in Chicago. It's part of the University of Illinois Chicago's new initiative through the Office of Community Collaboration. And I also have the honor of being a member of this same community.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. I am Trina Harris, the CEO of Touching My Love, a community-based organization down here in sunny Miami, Florida. I am a proud CAB member with the University of Miami and super excited to kind of share some information with you guys.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry. I'm Denise Morgan, and I am a community advocate for CARDS, community advisors for research, design, and systems. And I've been also involved with the Board of Older Adults, which is another like hand up from the CARDS organization. And I've been with them for a few years now with Lucia Community Center in Madison, Wisconsin.
Awesome. Thanks all. Good afternoon. I'm Greg Merritt. I'm pleased to be a part of this this group of phenomenal community leaders. I come in from a slightly different perspective. I'm a patient partner living a gifted second life after a sudden cardiac arrest and heart attack now some 13 years ago, and largely work with the University of Michigan CTSA, called MISHAR, working on something we call the Patient Partner Academy, trying to figure out how to create environments so that patient partners can be integral to the life cycle of any research, and also do some work with PCORI and PCORNet, the Patient-Centered Outcome Research Institute. Happy to be here.
Thanks so much. And I'd like to share as we begin that the people who just introduced themselves chose the theme for this conversation and the format. So the theme ended up being the world is on fire. And the world is on fire, both literally with wildfires like we've never seen before, but also figuratively, where the fabric of our shared humanity and the values that pull us together are being torn apart. And so what that looks like and feels like, and how the deep wisdom and experience that lives in community organizations can navigate us through this difficult time is the theme of this conversation. So how this is going to work is that each of the partners here are going to respond to one overarching question to begin with, and then there will be individual questions that each of the speakers will share their responses to as well. So the first question that speaks to this theme is, the world is on fire. What has that looked like for you as a community organization? And what would you like to see from academics and research at this point in time? And we'll start with Patty.
Thank you, Kat. So as we've mentioned, the world is on fire, but that has not been new to our experience as community organizations or as community partners. This has been a long-term trend that we've experienced, and coming from my space, I primarily work with immigrant and Native American communities in the San Francisco Bay Area. And for us, having fights against the distribution of resources has always been a constant. So for us, we've always had to work essentially backwards from all of the traditional knowledge that we have used as our foundation to move our work forward. A lot of the times it's white Western science that is finally catching up to Indigenous knowledge. And we are seeing that slowly, but as the tide changes with the administration, things are becoming a little bit more difficult. Interestingly enough, though, within the current structures for funding, somehow Native epistemology and Native traditional healing practices have become something that the government wants to fund. So it's very interesting working in a dual space where you have so many attacks happening against the immigrant community, but so much support, interestingly enough, for the Native American community in terms of funding. But what we would really like to see for researchers is to really stand on interrupting colonial logics. For me, it's, Western research has roots in colonial systems of categorization, surveillance, and control. But with the utilization of CBPR, we put the power back in the hands of community to really steer that boat for us. We've seen, especially in the Native community, when folks want to do research and engage with us, it's really for their benefit, and it's really that research question that they're looking to identify within us, as opposed to asking us what the research question is for us that we want to inquire on. And so we want researchers to come into spaces and not only engage with us as human beings and as people on the ground who have that lived knowledge and experience, but also to harness the energy that the community already has to solve our own problems. We are the masters and the architects of our own lived realities. And when researchers come into our spaces armed with the knowledge of how to navigate these systems that have been historically excluded to us, knowing ways to advocate in their own language within their rightful institutions to welcome us into those spaces, and be able to serve as advocates even outside of the institution for ways that we can show and demonstrate different ways of interpreting and analyzing data. It also welcomes epistemological Indigenous knowledge into spaces where it's been historically removed from. And so in this time, there's so many competing priorities. There's loss of funding. Institutions are being told to remove certain language from their websites that relate to anything DEI. But this has been our lived reality since the dawn of colonization. So for us, it's not really an option to remove language for us to continue funding. The language is our power. The language is who we are. It's who we represent, and it's who we speak for. And so what I would really like for researchers to do is just to stand by us and not be afraid. These fights and attacks against our communities and the funding streams that seek to support them are going to continue to happen, because with every progressive period, there is a conservative period where we move 2 steps forward and 15 steps back. But this has been something that we're well aware of. And so for communities and for community research partners, what I really want to encourage is that you don't step down from the intimidation tactics that exist, but really stand with us as partners.
Thank you so much. Christina.
Yeah, thank you. Beautifully said, Kari. So I do want to start by saying that today I'm speaking not just from a single organizational perspective, but as part of several community organizations that are navigating this really difficult moment. As you can imagine, we've been hit with major funding cuts. Resources are disappearing. Programs like AmeriCorps, which once helped to sustain our work, are being scaled back or eliminated. Folks experiencing food insecurity are impacted. Our infrastructures are shaken, but as community organizations always do, we have remained scrappy. We're organizing, we're adapting, and we're learning and leaning on the relationships that keep our work and communities going. I know that research is also facing their own version of uncertainty. Academic freedom is under pressure. Grants are being pulled, projects are stalled or canceled. And I see that. I'm not diminishing the struggle. But here's what I want everybody to remember. Just because your funding goes away does not mean the challenges or wisdom in our community have gone away. Hunger has not gone away. Housing insecurity hasn't gone away. And the root causes of inequity have not gone away. That's why right now there's a couple things that I want to emphasize. And that is, one, that you need to keep showing up in community. If you had partnerships in progress or relationships you were building that were disrupted by funding cuts, now is the time to prove that they matter beyond the dollars. Because how you show up or don't show up when things are hard tells us everything that we need to know about your commitment to community-centered research. Reciprocal relationships aren't just about shared success, they're about shared struggle. And that's what I'm holding right now. Another thing that I want to emphasize is that community wisdom has not been erased just because funding has. The knowledge, lived experiences, our insights into the systems that we're trying to change, those are still here. And you still have the responsibility to listen, learn, and stay connected. So I guess my invitation to you or challenge is that even in the face of uncertainty, to please keep showing up. These relationships are the infrastructure that no budget can or should take away.
Thank you, Christina. Crystal.
Yeah, first I want to echo what Kari and Christina have said. I've really had some very similar points to bring up. One of the things I did want to add, in addition to what Kari was saying, is that yes, the world is on fire, but a lot of us have dealt with burns along the way. So this is nothing new for a lot of community members, not only community members individually, but community-based organizations, and likewise with larger institutions as well. And having to take the brunt of various political changes along the way. Something that I did want to talk about is in the role that I work with, the role that I serve with UIC, again, I'm in a unique position because I also live in the community that this organization serves. So I bring to the table a different voice. Some of the information that is brought into the community is not readily received because of the delivery. And so I would ask researchers, academicians, to really consider how the methods that you use and how you bring various information to community. Something that was said earlier by Christina was talking about community wisdom. Recognize more that higher institutions is not where knowledge is created, but the knowledge is already in communities. And so open up spaces to allow community members to ask you questions, to tell you what it is they would rather be involved with when it comes to research. Let them present research topics to you. Again, community already has the answers. It's you that needs to uncover what it is that you're trying to research on. And then lastly, was brought up again about having listening and conversation and questioning sessions. Provide opportunities for community members to have real open, honest dialogue with you. What does that look like? Reach out to community-based organizations who are already doing the work. Another point that I wanted to share is in terms of resource sharing. I was recently in a gathering, it was an urban forum, and one of the presenters said something that kind of hit home, and that was, if it's said that community is the expert on their condition, they have the answers, then why is it that research experts are the ones who are paid well doing the work, but community organizations are offered pizza parties? And so in terms of resource sharing, consider ways, creative ways that funding for research can equitably be shared with community members and community organizations. And then I think lastly, there was one other point that I wanted to bring up, back to the language of research. Consider ways that research can be shared in friendly and using friendly language. So for example, the term participatory research, is that a term that you would say to an everyday person? How do you explain what that is? What does that mean? So how can you change the language of research that would make it friendlier to everyday people? And I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Trina.
Awesome, Crystal. Thank you, ladies, who shared some insightful information thus far. I'm coming from the lens of a kind of a ground roots community organization that's been in the community of an historically African-American community that was called Colored Town, and it was kind of the only community that African-Americans could live in back in the 50s and 60s, and has experienced so many fires over the course of years. I mean, we've seen the flames and felt the burns, as Crystal said, for years. And now that it is more widespread that universities are experiencing what communities and nonprofit organizations have been experiencing, it's one of those things where we're still here. Some organizations are still here in community, and we want to make sure to challenge folks who have been facing cuts to not run away. It's really time to partner, to connect with those organizations that have been doing the work, that can continue to kind of share knowledge and share ideas so we can get through this together. It's one of those things that now is the time to not work in silos. Now it's time to actually utilize some of the kind of expertise that individuals who have lived through this already have, and use them as the experts in this stage. So for me, it's one of those where oftentimes universities or researchers or academia come into communities just to extract, but not to pour in and to be invested. This is the time to really invest, really not just come in, get your information and leave out. It's really to make a state and build relationships with the community and the people that are trusted. It's hard for nonprofit organizations to sometimes partner with academia, because you come in because we're the trusted individuals in the community, and academia comes in going off of our name in the community and use our kind of credibility with the community, but then it leaves us behind in the process. We're tired of the pizza parties. So we want to be compensated at the same level as the universities, because you're using that information and knowledge that we have and we've worked so hard to gain from lived experience and walking alongside of people day in and day out. So it's critical that we kind of loosen up our bootstraps, tighten up our bootstraps together during this time. Don't run because the funding is gone. The needs are still there. The needs are definitely are exacerbated now, but we're here. So we want academia to continue to partner and to continue to be in part of this work.
Thank you, Trina. Greg.
Tough to follow that powerhouse group for sure. Let me come at this from a slightly different perspective, right? So as I raised, I think about this not from representing a particular community, not the same sort of ways that my colleagues do. However, it is something that's really critically in thinking about the future of research, right? So I will often say to my colleagues, can you believe that we still do research that don't have, at the question formulation phase, community members who can represent what happens in the community, and patients who are representing what it is that disease or treatment area is needed? I want to live in a world at some point that says, that you mean we used to do that? That used to happen, that took place? And I say that because I think it's the opportunity. So when I think about, and Crystal, your message was so powerful that you've lived through the burns along the way. And what this means to me is an opportunity for all of us to figure out how we move, as Trina much more beautifully than I said, from ashes that take place around this to action, to move towards something that changes paradigms forever, that says we're going to be the first place. So if it's at Wisconsin CTSA, whether it's all the CTSAs, we say, you know what, we're never going to fund a study. We're never going to talk about a study if there isn't a community partner and a patient partner sitting at the executive committee challenging what happens at the research. Because until that takes place, we can't do the rest of the life cycle of a project without that. So for me, I tend to think in questions, right? So what I want to do in the last few minutes I have here is to try to provoke you to think about questions that you might ask yourselves as researchers and colleagues who work in colleges and universities. So let's just start with things like informed consent, right? So lots of researchers rightfully talk about informed consent. It's absolutely necessary that lots of behaviors that we've seen ethically that have caused problems in communities over the past. But here's the piece that I don't see as always a two-way commitment. So we do that to be sure that you understand what's taking place. But what if informed consent process included not just the participants' commitments to the study, but also researchers' commitments to the community? So imagine something called a community benefits agreement, where institutions pledge things like specific economic investments proportional to the value that was generated from that research. Right. So this is a way that we shift the paradigm from things like, well, we're going to do local hiring, we're going to do procurement with local businesses, we're going to reinvest in the grant funding into our community priorities. So these are the kinds of things that you'd want to have happen. In fact, it may be, what if the CTSAs themselves became anchors for economic development, particularly in underserved communities and the places that you work and live. So these are the kind of thing. And then finally, what I would, the last question I'd ask is, as you think about this new era that now has forced you to think about economic challenges that you're having, that reinforced by the folks that you talk about, that this is not new to them, what if you really started to ask yourself, what would research design look like if community members and patient partners had veto power over every aspect of a research project, from its methodology to its timeline to its budget allocations? Shift completely the power dynamics that currently exist in research. And you said to yourselves, I'm going to assure that the kinds of things that we do in our research, in our university, in our organization is going to be the sort of thing that assures it is connected to the community, not necessarily to the whether or not I get accolades for assuring that I'm published and on the front of the stage and that kind of stuff. So those are just a couple of questions to provoke you to begin to think about ways in which this could shift paradigms from how it is today to how it might be.
Brilliant and radical folks we have here. Thank you for coming. Okay, the next section will be each individual in the same order we just heard, responding to a unique question. So we'll start out, Kari. Your question is, how is research a site of resistance?
Thank you, Kat. So for me, research has always been a site of resistance, and it's not just a reflection of the communities that I'm a part of and serve, but it's really, on the foundation of it, it's reclaiming the production of knowledge. Traditional academic institutions and research have often extracted knowledge, as we've heard from a lot of our colleagues here, from communities without reciprocity or without relevance. And so valuing community knowledge as equal or even sometimes more relevant than academic knowledge and co-creating research agendas with communities helps shift power back to the people and away from institutions. So for me, it's a refusal to let external experts define what matters and how it's studied and what gets published. Aside from that, it helps redistribute power and resources. By centering community leadership and securing funding for those community leaders to rise up to that place, we can implement participatory methods by identifying, as Greg mentioned, who controls resources, who defines impact, who benefits from the data. For me, research is not neutral. It's really a tool to redistribute structural power through healing informed and culturally grounded practices, at least for the communities that I'm a part of. And, it also helps make healing and liberation possible. When we center the resilience of our communities and we build community capacity beyond the project lifespan, that research and the legacy of that research and the impact of that continues to live on in our communities. Research can then become a site of regeneration as opposed to just inquiry. And then lastly, naming and exposing structural violence is something that needs to be done more in research. And it's more than just focusing on the deficit-based narratives that have been done in our communities generations prior, but through data, through stories, we're able to make our research more visible to the communities and have it be more impactful. We're tired of being a footnote or yeah, we're tired of being a footnote in y'all's research. We want to be the co-authors. We want to be the primary authors of the research, because so much of what has been gathered has been coming from our communities. And so how might we think of changing the way that academia really silos community partnerships into something that is more regenerative and something that helps us too in our careers as we move forward, right? I feel like had it had not been for the very few researchers in my life as a young scholar, a young brown woman entering academia, not knowing what I wanted to do, had it not been somebody in my corner advocating for me to be a first author for a project that I did a lot of work for, a lot of community engagement for, I don't really feel like I would be in this space with you all today, or feel like I had the agency and the power to really speak on behalf of my experiences. So there's a lot of leverage that you all as researchers, as folks who represent these institutions, have with community-based organizations and with community members. The resilience strategies that we can co-generate together can be used for us to survive and thrive together. Research for us can then bear witness to the realities of our experiences on the ground and really speak to those in ways that are reflective to our communities.
Thank you. Christina, what enhanced opportunities for equity and transparency exist in attending to the feedback loop in community and academic partnerships?
Yeah, thank you, Kat. I selected this question because I've partnered in a lot of campus and community relationships, and I've had the fortune and misfortune of a lot of those relationships. So we're talking a lot about radical changes, but I also think there's some really specific intentional shifts that can be made along the way to radical changes. So the first thing I want to say is that feedback isn't just a technical step in the research project, or it shouldn't be. It should be a relationship building commitment when it's done right. I do believe that when we attend to intentionally and becoming powerful in our feedback loops, it becomes a driver of equity and transparency. That is only if it's mutual, ongoing, and taken seriously. And when that doesn't happen, it not only ruins relationships, it halts research and has the ability to cause real harm in community. So I actually want to share a few examples of when feedback could and should have been an important part of that relationship building. And I want you to pay attention to the themes of co-design, evaluation, and communication. I am sharing these examples not just to criticize universities, but to provide tangible examples of when harm occurred or relationships were damaged because of lack of care to the commitment to feedback, and also to illuminate a few opportunities to do better. So the first one is an example of a community research study that happened in a community center space that I was a part of. And this is actually one of the community centers that one of the CARDS group or CAB groups that Kat helps with emerged out of. I was approached by a researcher who wanted to do a breastfeeding, chest feeding study for recent mothers, so birth to, I think, 9 months. I didn't get a lot of communication on the front end, but I was told it's a pretty non-invasive study. It's a survey. We can do the approval process or the consent form day of, and we'd like to conduct it at a community center event. So that seemed pretty straightforward. There wasn't a lot of communication. There wasn't a lot of back and forth. But what I was told is it's a paper survey. I said, great, that's accessible and available to most folks. We'll be able to provide compensation. Great, that's a wonderful element. And we'll do it at a community event that's already existing. What I observed in that implementation process was a 4 or 5 page survey that was in 9-point font that was administered while community activities were happening. The nature of the survey focused on recent mothers. And so people are trying to breastfeed, chest feed, engage their young people in activities while taking this survey. I had people asking me for support with this survey. They couldn't understand the questions. The size of the font was too small. And because this researcher was dangling a gift card as a reward or compensation at the end of the study, people were circling answers just to circle them. I attempted to give feedback, but because it wasn't a collaborative relationship, what I found was that the research was published anyways, and there was no opportunity to intervene. So what did that mean for the community? It meant that it was inaccurately represented in this research, that there was no avenue for feedback, no care or concern for feedback. And it also meant that research stopped in that community. Because a CAB group emerged out of this space, there was a culture of people believing in community engaged research, interested in participating in studies. But my job as a staff member at the organization was to prevent or ensure that further harm didn't happen. And what that meant was I couldn't trust researchers. So there was a stopgap in important work that needed to happen, could benefit research and could benefit that community. What I would have loved to see is opportunities to say, hey, this shouldn't be published. I don't have any weight with the IRB. That was deeply concerning. Another example I want to share is being a grant reviewer actually at UW. So I am a community reviewer for a grant that happens on campus, and I don't feel like it's helpful to name the particular grant, but there is a research or faculty reviewer, and then there is a community reviewer. What I observed in my first round of this grant process was that the questions and the criteria that they were asking us to utilize as community reviewers was a box checker. I am not a researcher. I couldn't respond or comment on specific proteins or research methodology. What I could bring was my community experience expertise. So what that showed me was I was tokenized for being a community participant. I was a box check, and it was a waste of my time. Over time, I was excited to see that they actually changed the criteria for community reviewers from researchers. But was that co-created with the community folks that were reviewers? It wasn't. So I saw them going in that direction, but there was an opportunity to say, hey, community partner, what do you think is important to us when you're reviewing this grant? What do you believe we should be weighing or holding? Another opportunity to co-create, evaluate our experience at the end, and communicate along the way. I understand that change takes time. And the last thing I want to share is, for a short period of time, I mentioned that I've been in community engaged work for 20 years. I did actually work at the University of Wisconsin for about 2 years. I was hired, I was told, because of my community experience and background. And what I learned when I got to the university was, we liked that because we could say that you worked in community, but we don't actually value your voice. Instead of getting to the university and finding myself in a space that did community engaged research where they were removing barriers, saying, wow, we didn't think about that. We love your experience and your expertise. I was told, you can't do that. You can't talk to this person. You don't understand because you don't have a PhD. So instead of the institution and the folks that hired me because of my lens inviting me in and removing barriers, they actually created them. They tokenized me, and I felt like it didn't belong. And ultimately I went back to community work, which is fine. But what I would love to see is, I know change is hard, but if you're in a position where you want to uplift and value community voice, then you need to get out of the way and stop creating barriers and think more innovatively and challenge yourself to say, why do I feel uncomfortable with this? Sit in that discomfort, move through it with us, and allow us to bring our true expertise and experience. Through these opportunities, I want to emphasize the themes of accountability, shared decision-making, and relationship building. I want to be clear that feedback doesn't mean just handing us a survey at the end of something. It means being in constant conversation and being willing to give up power. It means creating safe, respectful, and culturally appropriate spaces to speak up and be heard. It also means not leaning on your 1 or 2 community relationships to fully reflect the broader community. That's another theme I've seen, which is deeply concerning, which is the university or an area builds 1 or 2 relationships and constantly goes back to only those two relationships. Use those relationships to build other relationships. Community is not a monolith. I don't speak for all community partners in Madison, yet I'm constantly asked to be the community partner speaking or representing the broader community. I know that feedback can be hard and it might mean confronting uncomfortable truths. It might mean shifting power, but that is where the opportunity lies, because when you invite feedback and act on it, you're not just doing better for research, you're helping to build more just and responsive systems, which is what this group is talking about.
Thank you, Christina. All right, a question for Crystal. What do you want to say to challenge the research enterprise about what research looks like that focuses most directly on community impact?
Well, first I want to say Christina said a lot. So many points there that were so valid, and it definitely hit home with how research is done, and providing that, removing those stop gaps along the way. Now, what I would say to researchers probably would fall under the realm of creative pushback, if you will, right? So figuring out ways that you can do the most mutual benefit to the communities that you're looking to do your research on. And what does that look like? One key point that I want to bring home is opening up opportunities of pathway for in the professional world of research, with not just those who have come into a college setting, but reaching earlier to elementary schools and high schools to talk to students about what research is and how they could possibly look at research as a profession. Providing options and opportunities for high school students to look at what research is, not only on a broad scale, but with certain conditions that affect their community, their family members, for example. I've worked with one researcher from UIC whose project is around prostate cancer and its effect, or how it impacts Black men. So he was invited to speak to high school students about his project with a group of Black male students at an all Black male high school. They received that very well because he brought to them information that, one, they didn't know about the condition itself, but then the opportunity to do some research on something that could affect them along the way. So what could you do that would open up pathways to the profession of research? Another creative pushback idea is around funding. So to my knowledge, there are maybe a handful, NIH, the Corey, of organizations that will fund research. What could it look like if some other organizations, even foundations, were tapped into as funding sources for research, community-based, community-involved research? Another point is around a lot of grant opportunities, research opportunities are done for short periods of time, like perhaps 5 years. From my understanding, that seems to be the typical time for a research project. Within that 5 years, and surely beyond, things can change rapidly. So please consider expanding the amount of time that you do a research project, such that as things evolve and things change and information is uncovered, information can be shared back to the community as changes are occurring. 5 years is simply not a long enough time to do the research itself and then provide valuable feedback to community that could affect change within the community, whether it's clinical, and we know clinical research typically takes a long time because of, biological changes and so forth, but social research as well. there's an organization that I've had the opportunity to meet. It's called, I don't know if it's okay to say the name, but they are based in community. They have developed a program where they use community members. They teach them some very basic social research methodology. And then they have created a whole team of Black researchers in community. They do the research and they share it immediately back with community. So connecting with and using that kind of model, I think, would be very key in terms of being creative and pushing back on the regular paradigm of how research is done. What would it look like if you did more, and this has been talked about earlier, more opportunities, you take more opportunities to have conversations at the onset of the idea of a particular research topic, such that community members are providing and looking at the questions that are being asked in a particular survey. I had the opportunity to work with a team of researchers a few years ago around maternal health. They had, just like Christina said, they created this survey that was like 4 or 5 pages long. When I looked at it and went through it with the epidemiologist who was creating the whole survey, the question, the language was unnecessary. I had to ask her, so what is it that you really want to know? How about you just asking that? So instead of this really flowery language, scientific-based language, you know, if it is that you want to know how often are you breastfeeding, you know, simply say that, right? So having conversations early on in the development of a research project, such that community has more opportunity to really tell you and let you know how you should be moving within the community and the language that is more acceptable and comfortably understood.
Crystal, I'm going to need to give you a 1-minute warning.
Oh, okay. I'm so sorry. Lastly, identifying community-based organizations who are out here doing the work and connecting meaningfully with those organizations and letting them be your partners along the way. Whether they are service organizations, you know, community violence organizations, cancer support program organizations. Find those organizations, do the work to find who they are and let them become your partner and be those co-PIs, if you will. And then connecting with organizations who hold community events. So what would it look like if a team of researchers showed up at a mental health fair in the community, right? So again, recognizing or identifying community-based opportunities and getting involved meaningfully with those opportunities. Thanks, Kat.
Thank you, Crystal. Trina, let me ask you this question. How do we build trust and ensure that partnerships remain equitable over time?
So that's a great question, Pat. And I think one of the things that Christina said, and from my experience, that doesn't build trust, I'll start there, is always seeking out the token individual. I have been in the token Black individual in our community for years when it comes to partners coming into the community because of having a trusted relationship in the community. However, there are other organizations that are doing work in communities that multiple voices need to be heard. And sometimes when you choose a token individual, that person doesn't always speak for the entirety of the community. And it is unfair, and it does create a sense of bias in the community. But building a space of trust is, like Crystal said, start from the beginning. Universities know that before you're just coming to do an MOU agreement or to get buy-in, when you're writing the proposals when you first get the grant application or the funding source applications, come into the community. Even before that, we know that most communities that are underserved, that most of the studies or research take place in, are in usually the same communities with the same demographics, with the same people. Why not build an office facility in a community organization that you're constantly going to extract information from? Really build true partnerships. That means creating space and community, walking alongside of people in the community, but then also have faces that can actually relate and look like the people in the community that's asking sometimes what can be perceived as interrogating questions. Because if we really want honest and correct information from people, you have to be able, the individuals that you're requesting this information have to be able to trust you. And sometimes the information, when you're coming into community and giving those famous $25 gift cards out, what they do is those individuals in the community, they aren't providing accurate information. And what does that do? It is hurting our research, it is hurting community, and it is actually not really benefiting anyone. So actually working alongside of those individuals, but then also, like someone else said, make sure we're citing the community experts in your studies, giving credit where credit is due. That is important, and you'll be more receptible of receiving information from those individuals when other opportunities come and arise. I think that's one thing of building trust, but then also being honest from the beginning. It is very disappointing and disheartening when individuals or academia come into the community and not state the whole truth of what they need. Do not sugarcoat what you need from the individuals, and don't get them in a situation to state that, oh, I didn't know this was a part of the process. That is something that it's disrespectful, I would say, and it is unworthy, and you'll never get any valuable information back from those individuals when you put them in that uncomfortable position. It is important that when individuals come into the community, know the traumas that have happened thus far. You think about the past, be able to communicate and state, and it's relevant. The past traumas of research studies that have affected individuals in certain communities, it is real, and it carries from generation to generation because those stories are told. Be mindful and respectful of the past hurts and trauma and acknowledge it. I want to make sure Greg has enough time on here. So, but yeah, be genuine when coming into a community to build those trusted relationships.
Trina, thank you so much. Greg, the question for you today is, how do you effectively partner with patients or community members who live in vulnerable conditions that are created by systems of oppression?
Thanks, Kat, and thank you all for such good conversation and thoughts. So this question is important to me in part by my own personal story, which is as a kid growing up in poverty. This is the way I come at this. So from a lived experience in this space. And so I'll actually start this by, again, I declare myself as a questionologist. So most of what which is a made up term, but most of this I will do, we'll send back to you in questions to keep you thinking. And I'll even put a few more that I won't get to in the chat so you can keep thinking about these. But this issue comes up in part thanks to my good friend and colleague Jen Brown, who's on the call. So last year was raised this question around think about folks who are experiencing poverty, and the idea that for lots of very good reasons, researchers want to understand the community and the aspects and try to do what we can to actually manage and do what we can to change this situation. What I haven't seen happen, and this is the question that came to mind for me, is what if actually rather than study issues of poverty, we actually work to try to lift people out of poverty? So it extends a little to what Crystal was saying, that it's not just about what we do with elementary students and high school students. I'm 100% behind that. But it also may mean that what are the avenues that we're doing to say to folks who we've gotten involved in this research project, and now there's an opportunity to have them advance? Are there pathways that could be existing that says you could start as research assistants, community health workers, other ways we do research that will push folks to say, not only were you participants, it wasn't just a $25 gift card, it's actually a lifeline to assure that the next thing that you do is actually going to be part of the research project with which you were a participant at one time. And so, that's a way to keep thinking about workforce, not in the way we typically do, but actually in a way that says, let's rethink this. And then I think about a number of things that's been discussed here, including the idea of how do we move from workforce to a project to disseminating the outcomes of what it is that we've created. And so for me, I love, Crystal, your sort of creative pushback. And so for part of this for me are things like, why do we always start with dissemination being the way in which it goes into academic journals? Why don't we think very differently about this? What if we gathered with community members and thought about the way that art and music and plays could take what it is that we learn from research and not put it in an academic journal behind a paywall, but actually something that actually is clearly set out for the community? And so those are just a couple of ways to keep thinking about this. I have a series of questions that'll keep you thinking that I'll throw in the chat that'll help you to just keep pushing on the idea. There are many ways to do this, and I'll stop with this one, which is, let's, rather than inviting patients and community members to your research table, what if we created new tables together, and ones that actually didn't look anything like the way in which we currently operate? Maybe that's the mechanism that gets us out of this sort of burning ashes that are taking place now to a process that creates action in the future that says there's a new way to do research, and it's actually in partnership with patients and community partners in a very different way in which we're accustomed to doing it.
And that, my friend, is why an hour on your computer on a sunny day in Madison, Wisconsin is well worth your time. Thank you to all these amazing speakers for coming and sharing your expertise and believing in all the academic partners that we have capacity, interest, and passion for change. Thank you, everyone, so much.
Just as an extra thank you, and Pitch, Valeria, you mentioned how rich this conversation has been. I entirely agree. And I think there's many threads throughout it that have made me feel and think a lot, which are my favorite sorts of discussions. And so as we all reflect and process, please, keep thinking about how to apply this to your own work, and also how we can, incorporate into our own work with this format to bring new voices in, different voices, different perspectives, to not keep ourselves caught up in the same sort of circuitous logic that doesn't help anybody. And thank you all to the panelists so much. Really appreciate it.